They keep talking, but the sound never reaches you. Words move from their mouths with urgency, desperation, apology, but none of it lands. It's like watching lips move behind soundproof glass. You see the effort. You don't feel the meaning. They explain and explain, layering justification on top of regret, hoping one sentence might finally pierce through the distance you've built. What drives them mad is realizing that distance isn't argumentative. It doesn't debate. It doesn't respond. There was a time when one careless word from them could keep you awake all night. Now entire speeches dissolve without impact. That contrast alone terrifies them. They keep trying to correct the past with language, as if explanation were a time machine, as if interpretation could undo impact. But you don't live in their narrative anymore. They think if they just clarify enough, soften the tone enough, rearrange the facts enough, you will finally react. They don't understand that reaction is no longer part of your process. They mistake your silence for thinking. You are not thinking. You are finished. They keep adding context. You stopped needing context the moment the pattern became clear. They keep explaining intent. You stopped caring about intent when the results kept looking the same. They keep offering reasons. You already accepted truth. They talk as if you're still emotionally present in the room. They don't realize you left long ago and only your body attended the ending. They defend themselves with trembling logic, stitching narratives where they were confused, overwhelmed, misunderstood. They cannot accept the version where they were simply wrong. You are not resisting their words. You are immune to them. They don't know what unsettles them more, your lack of anger or your lack of engagement. At least anger would confirm you are still emotionally reachable. They speak faster now, sensing the gap widening with every sentence. They panic in their explanations the way people panic when they feel something slipping beyond retrieval. They keep circling the same points, polishing old excuses, replaying old motives with new packaging. They don't see that your detachment is not refusing to understand, it's refusing to care. They ask if you're listening. You don't answer. Not because you're confused, but because the question no longer applies. They still believe if they can just make you see, everything might reset. They haven't realized that seeing is exactly what ended it. You don't interrupt. You don't correct them. You don't argue facts. You simply don't participate. And that emptiness frightens them more than confrontation ever did. They explain because explaining once worked. Because your empathy used to soften their accountability. Because your heart used to stay open long enough for them to reshape the story. Now the story falls into a void. They feel like they're screaming into a canyon that returns no echo. They try sincerity next. Softer voice, slower words, care carefully injected into every sentence. They are trying a new key in a lock that no longer exists. They don't understand how someone who once over-listened, over-felt, over-cared can now sit through explanations without absorbing a single syllable. What they don't grasp is that detachment doesn't switch off hearing. It switches off relevance. You hear sounds. You don't hear meaning. They get defensive when your face doesn't change. They accuse you of being cold, of being unfair, of being impossible to reach, never questioning why they were once so easily heard. They think you're punishing them with silence. They don't understand silence stopped being strategy and became state. They want a verdict. You gave them distance. They want absolution. You gave them nothing. They want resolution. You gave them removal. They talk louder now, hoping volume will substitute for importance. It doesn't. They start repeating themselves as if repetition can create significance where significance has already died. They notice your eyes no longer search theirs for truth. That breaks something inside them. You used to need their explanations. Now you don't even verify them. They keep explaining because they need to rescue their self-image, not because they need your forgiveness. You stop believing apologies that arrive only after power is lost. They realize, slowly, that they are not speaking to a wounded heart anymore, but to a sealed door. They try guilt next, then nostalgia, then responsibility, then denial, then remorse. Every emotional currency they once spent successfully now has zero value. They get frantic when they notice your breathing is steady. No trembling, no visible conflict. Calm becomes the most terrifying response they've ever met. They want to provoke something, anything. Even hatred would feel better than this absence of reaction. They explain and explain because they can't accept that the last thing you needed from them was more words. They haven't realized yet that your detachment is not built on misunderstanding. It is built on understanding too clearly. They talk because they are still inside the emotional storm. You sit outside it. They speak because they still want control over the meaning of what happened. You stop negotiating meaning. They accuse you of shutting down. They don't see that what shut down was the part of you willing to absorb damage for the sake of connection. They are terrified by how calm you are while they unravel in justification. They explain themselves because they are still trying to survive the aftermath. You already did. They think your silence means there's hope if they just keep talking. What they don't know is that you are not holding your words back. You simply have none left for them. They keep explaining because they cannot process an ending that doesn't include their narrative. You detached because you finally chose an ending that doesn't require their permission. They wanted you to hear them. What they never prepared for was becoming someone you no longer listened to at all. They kept explaining themselves. You didn't hear a word, not because you were hurt, but because they were no longer worthy of your attention. And that is the most final form of detachment there is. They eventually realize that the more they explain, the more invisible they feel. Every sentence they offer falls into the same quiet space where their importance used to live. They speak, but nothing echoes back. And people are not built to survive without echoes. They start measuring their worth by your reaction, and there is none. No anger to validate their impact. No tears to confirm their importance. Just your steady calm, which quietly tells them they no longer exist where it once mattered most. They remember when you used to beg for clarity, when you used to chase understanding, when your heart needed their words like oxygen. Now they are suffocating under the weight of words you don't even need anymore. They try to remind you of everything you shared, hoping memory will reopen the door. They don't understand that memory was the lesson it taught you exactly why the door had to stay closed. They accuse you of being cruel for not listening. They never accuse themselves for teaching you that listening only meant being heard more efficiently. They keep explaining because explanation gives them the illusion of control. As long as they are talking, they believe the ending is still negotiable. Your silence tells them the negotiation ended before they even realized it began. They feel powerless in front of your detachment because they can no longer shape how you see them. Their image is no longer in their hands. It sits quietly in your decision, and decisions don't argue. They replay their speeches in their heads afterward, rewriting what they should have said better, softer, smarter, as if a perfected apology could travel back in time and find a heart that already moved on. They are haunted by how present you look while being emotionally absent from them. It confuses their instincts. Every signal they once relied on no longer applies. They expected to be forgiven or hated. They never expected to be irrelevant. And irrelevance is the one outcome they have no emotional language for. They used to live inside your reactions. Now they are locked outside of your indifference, knocking with explanations that no longer translate into meaning. The most painful part for them is not that you stopped listening, it's that you stopped needing to. They wanted their words to save them. They didn't realize the moment words needed to save them was the exact moment they stopped mattering. They will spend a long time talking about you in rooms you'll never enter again, trying to rebuild a version of themselves that doesn't look so small in your silence. And finally, they will have to face the truth that no explanation can survive. You didn't stop listening because you misunderstood. You stopped listening because you understood everything too clearly. They kept explaining themselves because they still needed an ending that made them feel whole. You detached because you chose an ending that made you whole. They kept talking. You stopped hearing. And that is where the story truly, completely, permanently ends. They thought they knew you. They thought every layer was mapped, every reaction predictable, every breaking point memorized. What they were not prepared for was the version of you that no longer performs for their understanding. This version doesn't announce growth. It doesn't seek validation. It doesn't demand acknowledgement. It simply exists, and that quiet confidence unsettles them more than confrontation ever did. They keep trying to reconcile the old you with the present you like two images that refuse to overlap. The kindness they once exploited now stands behind boundaries they can't cross. They expected evolution to keep your softness. What they got instead was precision. They were ready for your anger. They were ready for your sorrow. They were even ready for your revenge. They were not ready for your self-command. You don't prove yourself anymore. And that change alone dismantles the hierarchy they thought they stood on. They still talk as if their influence defines you. What ruins their sleep is realizing your power no longer references them at all. They look for cracks that used to exist. They find armor instead. They expect emotional availability. They meet emotional sovereignty. They thought confidence would make you loud. It made you unbothered. They thought strength would make you aggressive. It made you unreachable. They are unsettled by how calm you are with your own authority. You don't ask permission to take up space in your own life anymore. They feel the shift in rooms before they understand it. Conversations pause. Eyes adjust. The energy recalibrates around you without your consent or request. They used to feel taller around you. Now they feel exposed. They remember when they could shake you with words. Now they measure their speech, unsure which version of you they are speaking to and afraid of provoking the wrong one. This version of you doesn't defend. It observes. It doesn't chase. It chooses. It doesn't collapse. It calculates. They are disturbed by how little you need from them now. Dependency once comforted them. Independence disorients them. They thought they were the standard you measured yourself against. What bends their pride is learning they were only a phase you outgrew. They don't know how to compete with a person who isn't competing at all. Your presence no longer seeks approval, and approval was the last leverage they had. They try to humble you with memories of who you used to be. They don't realize those memories are the exact reason this version was born. They feel irrelevant standing next to your certainty, not because you diminish them, but because you no longer adjust yourself to accommodate their insecurity. They look for hesitation. They find resolve. They look for doubt. They find alignment. They look for the old openings. They find closed systems. They weren't ready for a you who doesn't romanticize struggle anymore. They weren't ready for a you who doesn't confuse intensity with truth. They weren't ready for a you who moves without needing applause. They still live inside the version of you they could manipulate. That world no longer exists. They expected your growth to remain familiar. It didn't. They expected your confidence to be loud enough to mock. It's too silent to touch. They expected your power to need explanation. It doesn't. They feel disarmed by the way you no longer over-explain your decisions. You don't justify departures. You don't narrate peace. They thought your softness made you safe. They didn't consider what happens when softness becomes selective. They fear this version because it can't be guilted back into old patterns. They fear this version because it walks away without announcing exits. They fear this version because it doesn't seek emotional refunds. They fear this version because it remembers everything and still moves forward without bitterness. They try to provoke reactions to confirm you're still reachable. You remain uninterested in being confirmed. They tell themselves you're pretending. They need that belief to survive the truth that you are realer than ever. They don't know how to interact with someone who is no longer emotionally negotiable. They feel destabilized by your steadiness. Your calm interrupts their chaos. They thought your evolution would keep them included. What destabilizes them is realizing growth doesn't offer honorary seats. They weren't ready for a you that no longer shrinks to preserve comfort in others. They weren't ready for a you that chooses ease over endurance. They weren't ready for a you that learned self-respect without losing compassion, but also without giving access. They wanted you powerful but still approachable on their terms. You became powerful on your own. They wanted you healed, but still available to old wounds. You healed in a direction that didn't point back. They weren't ready for a you that doesn't seek closure, they seek forward motion. They weren't ready for a you that doesn't ask, "Is this okay?" They weren't ready for a you that no longer waits to be chosen. This version of you doesn't announce arrival. It simply rearranges the room. And that's why it messes with their head. Because everything they used to rely on to predict you is gone. Because their old power only worked on the old you. Because your silence now carries authority. Because your calm now contains decision. Because your absence now has permanence. They weren't ready for this version because this version no longer needs their permission to exist. They weren't ready for this version because this version doesn't look back. They weren't ready for this version because this version ended their influence without confrontation. They weren't ready for how little they matter to this version. They weren't ready for the kind of power that doesn't threaten. It simply moves on. And that is why this version of you lives rent-free in their mind. Not because you attacked, not because you destroyed, but because you evolved so completely that their reality can't keep up with your direction anymore. And that is the most unsettling kind of dominance there is. They try to pretend they're unfazed, but the change in you unsettles them in ways they can't disguise. Your confidence no longer seeks mirrors in their approval, and that robs them of the role they once played in your reflection. They keep waiting for the old triggers to work, the guilt, the nostalgia, the confusion, but none of it lands. It's like pressing buttons on a machine that has already been powered down. They sense that your peace isn't fragile anymore. It doesn't wobble when tested. It doesn't bend to pressure. It simply holds. And that kind of stability unnerves people who relied on your little cracks. They thought your growth would still orbit them. What bends their pride is realizing your life has found a center that doesn't include their gravity. They replay memories, trying to anchor you back to who you were. They don't understand that memory no longer has permission to trespass in your present. They assumed your softness would always be accessible. They were not prepared for what happens when softness becomes guarded by self-respect instead of hope. They keep checking for emotional reactions like someone tapping glass to see if it's real. Your stillness confirms it is, and that confirmation scares them. They feel like they lost a version of you they believed they owned. They hadn't realized it was always borrowed. They struggle with the idea that your power now comes without noise, loud strength they could challenge. Quiet strength leaves them nowhere to strike. They expected your confidence to need witnesses, but yours doesn't perform, it doesn't persuade, it doesn't recruit. It simply moves as if doubt no longer has citizenship in your decisions. They try to understand when control slipped from their hands. The truth unsettles them most. Control didn't slip, it was returned permanently. They speak about you with confusion now, not authority. The tone has shifted from "I know them" to "I don't recognize them." And that loss of certainty breaks something in their pride. They once believed they shaped you. What shakes them now is realizing pressure shaped you into someone they can't reach. They expected your growth to still seek their validation. What confuses them is how effortlessly you stopped seeking anything from them at all. They feel outpaced not because you rushed ahead, but because you no longer slowed down to keep them comfortable. They tell themselves you're just playing a role. They need that belief to survive the idea that this version of you is permanent. They were ready for your success. They were not ready for your independence. They were ready for your healing. They were not ready for your boundaries. They were ready for your confidence. They were not ready for your non-negotiables. They built their comfort on the assumption that you would always be reachable. What's breaking their mind now is realizing you didn't become unreachable out of spite. You became unreachable out of alignment. And here is the ending they will wrestle with in silence. You didn't change to intimidate them. You didn't grow to prove anything. You didn't evolve to make a statement. They are losing their minds not because the bond ended, but because of how it ended. A connection that once felt unbreakable didn't collapse in chaos. It dissolved in silence. And silence is the one ending they cannot analyze, debate, or reverse. What unsettles them most is not that you left. It's that nothing dramatic followed. No accusations, no public unraveling, no emotional wreckage for them to point at and say, "See? It mattered. You detached so cleanly. It feels unreal in hindsight." They remember how intense the bond once was, how deeply you showed up, how thoroughly you were woven into their everyday lives. And now that absence feels unnatural, like a limb missing without pain to explain it. They expected grief to look loud. Instead, it looks like distance. It looks like composure. It looks like someone who reached the end of their emotional endurance without announcing it. They revisit old moments, trying to locate the fracture. They replay laughter, memories, promises. They search desperately for the exact second where warmth turned into withdrawal. What they never find is a single moment, only a pattern they ignored. They thought the depth of the bond guaranteed permanence. They believed history itself would protect them from consequences. They never imagined that love could expire quietly once it was repeatedly disrespected. They are haunted by how normal your life seems now, how intact your days look, how easily your world adjusted to their absence. That normalcy feels like betrayal to them, like proof that the bond mattered less to you than it did to them. But the truth is harsher. The bond mattered so much that it taught you what you refused to tolerate again. They wait for signs of longing, for cracks of nostalgia, for moments where you slip back into a familiar softness. What drives them mad is how consistently those moments never arrive. They still feel the emotional cord. You don't. They still live inside the echo of what was. You live inside what is. They believe the bond gave them permanent emotional access to you. They never realized access is not owned, it is granted, and it can be revoked without permission. Your detachment is not dramatic. It doesn't seek attention. It doesn't perform indifference. It simply exists as fact, and facts are terrifying when people were depending on fantasy. They cannot tell if you are angry, healed, numb, or just done. The uncertainty eats at them. When someone detaches without blame, there is no villain to fight, only loss to face. They would rather you hate them. Hate still connects. Hate still proves emotional relevance. Your detachment proves something far worse, that they no longer reach you at all. They tell themselves you will come back to the bond eventually, that habits return, that history has gravity. They don't understand that boundaries have gravity too. They remember the version of you that stayed, explained, waited, forgave. They don't recognize the version of you that simply leaves quietly and never circles back. They feel erased from a chapter they thought defined them. They don't understand how someone who once loved deeply can now withdraw completely. What they fail to accept is that deep love is exactly what taught you how to detach when it became unsafe. Your silence does not invite dialogue. Your distance does not request interpretation. It just closes the emotional door without a speech. They are driven mad by the lack of leverage. They cannot provoke jealousy. They cannot trigger arguments. They cannot manipulate regret. The emotional hooks they once relied on find nothing to catch. They try to remind you of everything you shared. They don't realize that memory is not a contract. It is a lesson. They cannot comprehend how bonded hearts become unreachable bodies. They don't understand that detachment is not forgetting. It is refusing to bleed where the wound keeps reopening. They look for themselves inside you and panic when they can't find their reflection anymore. They feel small standing next to your quiet composure, not because you speak louder, but because you no longer explain. They thought damage would create dependency. It created escape. They believed the depth of the bond would override the cost of their behavior. It only clarified it. They are tormented by the way your detachment does not seek revenge. Revenge would mean you still care how they feel. Your indifference confirms the opposite. They wonder how long you were preparing to leave emotionally before you did physically. They replay every moment now with suspicion. They are driven mad by the idea that your detachment did not start when the bond ended, but when the bond began to hurt. They fear they were replaceable in a story they believed they owned. They want to be missed loudly. You miss privately or not at all. They want proof that they mattered enough to fracture you. You never gave them that satisfaction. They want an emotional reaction they can interpret as power. They received peace instead. And nothing makes people more unstable than watching someone they once had completely become unreachable without hostility. The bond they still romanticize is now the reason your boundaries exist. Your detachment is not cold because you lacked feeling. It is cold because the feeling was exhausted. And that is why it drives them mad. Because they are haunted not by what you did to them, but by what you quietly refuse to keep doing to yourself. They lie awake at night replaying versions of you that no longer exist, trying to stitch old warmth onto a present that refuses to thaw. They reach for memories the way people reach for ghosts out of habit, not hope. They don't miss the bond the way you experienced it. They miss the version of the bond where your presence made their life easier, softer, safer. They miss the benefits, not the responsibility. They try to convince themselves that your detachment is temporary, that silence is just a phase. They cling to the idea of your return because accepting your permanence would mean accepting their loss. They scroll through past conversations like sacred texts, trying to decode where they went wrong, as if the answer isn't stitched clearly into every boundary you were forced to build. They imagine what they would say if you ever spoke again. Full speeches, full confessions, full apologies polished with hindsight. What unravels them is knowing those words no longer have an audience. They wonder how it's possible that you once needed them and now don't even acknowledge their emotional gravity. That shift bends their sense of reality. They feel rejected on a level deeper than abandonment because abandonment still implies attachment. What you gave them was disconnection. They tell themselves you're pretending, that your strength is a performance. They need that lie to survive because the truth that you are genuinely at peace without them is unbearable. They look for signs of regret in your life. They search your growth for evidence that leaving them cost you something. What they keep finding instead is stability. They hoped your world would shrink after the bond collapsed. Watching it expand without them fractures their pride in quiet, merciless ways. They want you to still be shaped by what you shared. They don't realize the bond shaped you into someone who no longer needs conditions to choose themselves. They want to believe your detachment is punishment, because punishment still centers them. They cannot accept that your detachment is freedom. They dread the possibility that you didn't just move on from them, but move beyond the version of yourself that ever accepted that bond at all. They feel replaced without being replaced, displaced without another name to blame, outgrown without a rival to fight. They keep waiting for the emotional earthquake everyone promises comes after deep connection ends. What drives them mad is realizing you already survived it privately. They thought the bond made them irreplaceable. What they are learning now is that nothing is irreplaceable when it becomes unsafe. They believe the depth of your connection guaranteed your return. They didn't know depth can also teach someone exactly how to disappear. And now comes the part they will never fully recover from: the understanding that your detachment is not built on anger, punishment, or regret. It is built on decision. You didn't drift away. You chose distance. You chose peace. You chose the version of yourself that no longer needs to be held hostage by memory. They are going mad because they are stuck in what was, while you live fully inside what is. They romanticize the bond because it comforts them. You remember the cost because it freed you. They are haunted by your absence. You are protected by it. And that is the final blow to their sanity. You didn't detach to hurt them. You detached to save yourself. You didn't sever the bond out of cruelty. You severed it out of clarity. You didn't leave to be remembered. You left to be whole. And the most devastating truth they will ever face is this: the bond they are still grieving is the exact reason you will never return. And that is the end of their madness and the beginning of your unshakable peace. Truth surfaced. They expected an explosion when the truth surfaced. They expected shock, screaming, exposure, emotional chaos. What they were not prepared for was the absence of reaction, the stillness that followed the betrayal like a closed door instead of a battlefield. They rehearsed your reaction in their heads. They planned for anger. They braced for confrontation. They even prepared themselves to feel powerful watching you unravel. What terrified them instead was how little it seemed to touch you on the surface. They mistook your calm for ignorance at first. Surely you didn't know yet. Surely the silence meant delay. Surely the storm would arrive eventually. But the storm never came, and that unsettled them in ways they could not explain. They expected you to bleed where they cut. They expected evidence of impact. What they got was composure. And composure is the one thing betrayal never accounts for. They confused your lack of reaction with weakness. They didn't realize it was calculation. You didn't confront because confrontation still gives oxygen to the offense. You didn't accuse because accusation still grants the traitor relevance. You chose the one response they could never manipulate: detachment. They waited for you to lash out. You reorganized your life instead. They waited for rage. You chose silence. They waited for revenge. You chose erasure. And now they are scared. They are scared because people who don't react emotionally cannot be predicted. They are scared because they no longer know where they stand with you. They are scared because your stillness feels final. They thought being snaked would provoke desperation. They didn't understand that desperation only lives where hope still survives. You had already buried hope before the betrayal ever made itself visible. They study your behavior now like a puzzle with missing pieces. They overanalyze your tone, your timing, your absence. They are trying to locate the emotional damage they assumed must be there. What they cannot accept is that you already processed the betrayal before they ever saw your awareness of it. You didn't react because your reaction already happened privately. Pain already did its work. Disappointment already burned its path. Trust already left without ceremony. By the time the truth reached them, it was already old news to your nervous system. They are scared because you didn't expose them. You didn't validate the betrayal by dramatizing it. You didn't give them the satisfaction of watching your world shake. They wanted to feel the weight of their impact on you. Instead, they felt invisible. There is nothing more unsettling to a betrayer than discovering their betrayal did not make them important. They whisper your name now with caution. They speak about you with uncertainty. They don't know whether they should fear your return or accept your disappearance, and that ambiguity tortures them. They are used to consequences that scream. Yours arrived as silence, and silence leaves no instructions for how to respond. They thought you would try to defend your dignity. They didn't realize you protected it by removing the audience entirely. They anticipated a performance. You gave them closure without confession. They assumed betrayal would bind you emotionally even through anger. What surprised them was how cleanly you cut the emotional cord without noise. You became unreadable to them, and unreadable people feel dangerous to those who depend on manipulation. They expected you to demand explanations. You already understood the motive. They expected you to ask, why? You already knew who. They waited for you to expose the knife in their hand. You simply stepped away from the blade and let them stand alone with it. They fear you now not because you threaten them, but because you don't. Your lack of reaction removed their leverage. It removed the story they planned to tell about you being too emotional. It removed the role they wanted you to play in justifying themselves. Now they are left with themselves, and that is uncomfortable. They keep replaying the moment you found out, searching your face for the crack that never showed. They are haunted by the calm you wore like armor. They don't trust your quiet because it doesn't beg for reconciliation. It doesn't threaten retaliation. It simply ends access. They are used to people reacting loudly so they can feel the center of the scene. You denied them that center. They are scared because your detachment feels irreversible. They expected betrayal to make you smaller. Instead, it made you sharper. They thought you would collapse into self-doubt. Instead, you collapsed inward, rebuilt quietly, and emerged without needing their witness. They whisper that you're cold now. They don't realize cold is what remains when someone stops bleeding in public. They worry about what you might do. What they never expected is that what you chose to do was leave emotionally without ceremony. They wanted your heartbreak to tether you to them. Your non-reaction cut the tether entirely. They are scared because they cannot measure their influence on you anymore. They are scared because you didn't need justice to move on. They are scared because you didn't need revenge to feel whole. They are scared because you didn't even need closure. You didn't react not because the betrayal didn't hurt, but because, by the time it surfaced, you had already chosen yourself over the explanation. They mistook your silence for confusion. It was resolution. They mistook your calm for delay. It was departure. They mistook your lack of reaction for weakness. It was the final proof that they no longer mattered enough to disturb your peace. They snaked you. You didn't even flinch. And that is what will haunt them the longest. They begin to realize the most unsettling part is not what you did, but what you refused to do. You didn't beg for the truth. You didn't chase the lie. You didn't demand loyalty from people who already proved they had none. You simply let the revelation pass through you like confirmation instead of catastrophe. They expected the betrayal to become the center of your life. What shattered them is watching it become a footnote. They tell themselves that your calm must be an act, that no one stays that composed after being cut that deep. They hope secretly that you're breaking in private. They want to believe they still have some emotional footprint left inside you. But time keeps proving otherwise. Your life does not slow down, your focus does not fracture, your peace does not return with conditions. The world does not collapse around the moment they thought would define you. And that confuses them more than any confrontation ever could. They don't understand how betrayal didn't turn you bitter. They don't understand how you can walk forward without dragging the wound behind you as an identity. They cannot comprehend healing that doesn't require public suffering. They keep waiting for the delayed reaction. Surely it will come. Surely the calm is only shock. Surely the grief will surface eventually. But shock does not last this long. And grief does not look this quiet when it is still alive. They feel exposed now, not because you told anyone, but because your silence leaves their actions naked without commentary. There is no spin, no counter-narrative, no emotional smoke to hide inside. Just the truth standing alone. They wanted control over the aftermath. They wanted to manage your response the way they managed the betrayal. But control depends on reaction, and you gave them none. They feel watched by your absence, judged by your peace, condemned by the fact that your life looks lighter without them in it. They thought your trust was a weakness they could exploit without consequence. What they discovered too late is that trust, once withdrawn, does not beg to be restored. They begin to understand that some people don't get loud when they are done. They get unreachable. They try to explain your silence as immaturity, arrogance, emotional shutdown. They will call it anything except what it truly is: finality. They remember how you used to explain yourself, how you used to fight to be understood, how you used to stay even when staying hurt. They don't recognize the person who no longer performs those rituals. They are scared because they cannot tell where your boundaries are anymore, and people fear what they cannot map. They try to bait a reaction with reminders of the past, with staged remorse, with subtle threats, with emotional nostalgia disguised as concern. None of it lands. Every attempt dissolves quietly in your indifference, and that makes them feel small. They were prepared for conflict. They were prepared for damage control. They were prepared for chaos. They were not prepared for someone who simply disengages without asking to be understood. They begin to suspect that your reactionlessness was not shock but strength, that you did not freeze because you were overwhelmed. You froze because you had already decided. They wonder how long you knew, how long you carried the truth without signaling it. That realization unnerves them, the thought that you were already gone emotionally while they still thought the game was running. They wanted to see you wounded. Instead, they watched you become inaccessible. They wanted to feel powerful over your pain. Instead, they felt irrelevant to your peace.